Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that story. And now we will hear another story. This story is from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and it is the story of the burning bush. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." Then God said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
Thank you, Kathleen. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God. Amen. When we speak of being called in the context of our Christian faith, this story from the Hebrew Bible is often one that comes quickly to mind. It is an overtly obvious call to a gargantuan task. Bring the oppressed people into freedom. And of course, there are memorable moments in this story too. The fire, the feet, and the not quite there yet. I'm reminded of a dream told by Edmund Matatawabin, a Cree chief from northern Ontario, and he tells this dream in his memoir, Up Ghost River. In this dream, there is a procession taking place on Parliament Hill, and the procession is guided by drums, carrying those walking up to the Centennial Flame and then beyond to the Peace Tower. Waiting at the open doors are various political dignitaries, and he calls these the Welcome Committee. He writes of this entrance, "We pause and move to either side. This is an important moment, unexpected and long fought for. Across the walkway, there is an elder with tears in his eyes. He's holding an eagle staff in one hand and the hand of a friend in another. People shake bells, and with the noise, young men wearing traditional clothing sway and twirl and jump to the beat, and his body moves in the rhythm. The fringe of his beaded vest twirls and flies as he dances. And then he writes, the moment has come. He sees the national chief walking down the pathway toward the open doors, and some chiefs say she should be carried. But she wanted her feet on the ground with her people. In this dream, just days before, the government of Canada had issued an official statement to recognize the treaties and align all policy and laws according to the spirit of their promises. This is Matatawabin's dream. But this familiar call to this gargantuan task, to bring the oppressed into freedom, is also God's. There are memorable moments in this dream too. The fire, the feet, and the not quite there yet. I find myself taken aback by the way that this third chapter of Exodus begins. We are plopped into what, upon first glance, might look like a serene setting. There is a father-in-law. There are sheep, and there is presumably a pasture. But we are not to be fooled by the moment we stumble upon as the reader. This is no paradise. It is only a pause. Moses' entire life up to this point has been a search for right relationship, and it has gone horribly, horribly wrong. Moses is a murderer, not because of an insatiable desire to cause harm, but because of the all too human emotion, anger. Upon witnessing injustice and oppression amongst the Hebrew people, Moses acts quickly and harshly and violently and finds himself once again in wrong relationship. So Moses flees out of necessity and instinct into the wilderness. And it is here where we encounter him, in a place of sorrow, dead things, brokenness, and grief. But this particular part of the Moses story points us toward something else. Moses, it reads, led his flock beyond the wilderness, and there he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And this is where he heard the call. Sitting with the pain and the hurt of cultural genocide that was the placing of indigenous children into residential schools to teach them the ways of white people is certainly the wilderness. The circumstances themselves, the stories of abuse, the national failure to meet the needs of indigenous families, still, can we have some clean water, please? That is the wilderness. The false teaching of our own Christian message that led to and condoned those decisions, that is the wilderness. The intergenerational trauma being played out in the lives of survivors and their kin, that is the wilderness. Human suffering of any kind is the way of the wilderness. And we cannot deny that we are all here. And still, we cannot know this wilderness like the oppressed do. We can only be here to see them through. This is a dream, God's dream. This wilderness, these protests and riots and barricades and upheavals and trials and hearings, these are gospel. Jesus knows the rebellion of the wilderness, knows the landscape of the wilderness, chose the loneliness of the wilderness so that he could be closer to us. And through his own journey in that place, we see that it is holy to desire that we are not here, to dream of a world that is flourishing and liberated and free from hurt. But we are here. And there is work to do if we are to ready ourselves for the mountain of God, if we are to make it beyond with one another. It will take fire. It will take our marching feet. And we are not there yet. The work of reconciliation for Canada and for the United Church of Canada is the work of the wilderness, and it is holy ground. We cannot move beyond until we turn aside, depart from ourselves and our own desire to fix it, and instead turn to God and to one another, face the relationships that have been discarded along the way, and pray for healing and for strength and for guidance. This past week, I had the honor of speaking with Reverend Minnie Hornage, who is the minister of Alberni Valley United Church. a congregation that many of us are familiar with from our welcome and our prayers, and also from that chat box on Sunday morning. Alberni Valley reached out to us about a year ago, hoping to engage in some learning around online worship, something both our communities do. And the time has come for us to learn from them as they engage in a ministry and a mission that has grown out of a story from within this very wilderness. So now, let us listen.
Happy to. I just want to start off by thanking you very much for the invitation to speak and have this conversation with yourself and with Highlands. So hello, all the Highlands folk and everybody else who's part of the live stream ministry, of which we check in once in a while. So that's great. And I'm happy to talk about my sense of call to kind of the ministry of reconciliation, and maybe why Orange Shirt Day is so important to me. So thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to have been invited. So I just like to step back and introduce myself. And it's important to me to introduce myself following protocol for these particular territories. So I am Reverend Minnie Hornage, and I want to acknowledge that I work, live, and play on the unceded territories of the Tishat and the Hupacheset, who have for time immemorial stewarded this land and taught us much along our journey with them. And in keeping with tradition, my dad's name is Albert Larson. He was born and raised in Kildonan, which is on Uchucklesset territory. My mom is Dorothy Larson, maiden name McIntosh, and she was raised in various communities in the interior of BC, starting with in a carrier nation. And I'm a cisgender woman and live with a large amount of privilege, and I have accepted the responsibility of having that privilege, and part of that is a call to reconciliation. So I just was mentioning to Andria earlier that I really have this strong resonance of with Moses's call to what God was asking of Moses, and from the point of a little bit of wondering if he has the gifts and the resources and what he needs to be able to do this work of God. So I just wanted to start and just tell you a little bit about my first call to ministry story, and then just tell you a little bit about Alberni Valley United Church. So when I was about 40, I think, I was attending my first BC conference, annual general meeting at Naramata. And I was out one evening taking a break from meetings, and the orchards were in full blossom. And it was so beautiful and so fragrant. And in that setting, I heard the audible voice of God say, "Minnie, I have a call on your life." And it startled the heck out of me. I think that's how Moses felt. It's kind of my burning bush. And it became very clear that it was a call to ordained ministry. However, I stepped back, and God needed to wait for about 10 years until until I thought that I was ready, or that I stopped resisting God's call, whichever it was. It was a call to Alberni Valley United Church. The thing about this call was I wasn't looking for a call in Port Alberni. I was sensing a call to another community who had offered me a call. But in that process, it seemed to me that God was saying in a very audible voice again, I want you to go to Port Alberni and help my people heal. And underneath that, there was a really strong sense of call to reconciliation. As you may know, these territories hosted the Alberni Indian Residential School, which was run by the United Church, and one of the schools which has a terrible, horrific story of abuse that happened in those schools. But I wanted to talk about the year 2015. So by then I'd been here 5 years. And so in the year of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 94 calls to action, we've been very involved in the local Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings regionally, and the ones in Vancouver. So, and because we take this call very seriously, the 94 calls to action, we began right away to develop our own next steps on the journey of reconciliation plan is what we called it. And I just want to name that our spiritual practice that has started then and has continued in the journey of reconciliation right now is, what's our one next step? So Alberni Valley United Church is a congregation on a high Sunday of about 60 people. And so we're very careful at what we can take on, what we have the capacity for. So we began with what simple things of, I think it was 2016 where we first began acknowledging territory. And those were new days of any congregations doing that. So, and then our next step was, I said one day, wouldn't it be lovely if we could learn a prayer in New Chelmsford and use that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or whatever. And someone went and spoke to an elder, and this elder, Miss Jean, we call her, gifted us with a prayer. One of the things we discovered early on is it's important, yes, to take that step. It's also important to discern, are we called to take a step back? Because what we found as we delved into this work was that there was internal reconciliation that needed to happen in the community. And if we didn't pause, there would be a deep fracturing. It activates everyone's trauma. When I was called here, I thought what God was saying was to help my people heal, was talking about primarily First Nations folk and of course our relationship with them. But over time, I've also realized that part of that call is the deep call for us as non-Indigenous people to, that we have deep wounds from colonization as well. And over these past 10 years, I would say that I spent about 8 of it building relationship, one person at a time, listening, waiting, listening, learning, waiting. I did this for almost 8 years, and because I know that that's the pace. I don't set the pace of this relationship. And one day, a residential school survivor named Nora Martin phoned me, and she said, "Minnie, I'm wondering if the United Church is interested in working on reconciliation together." And that question just was like the Holy Spirit running up and down me, right? Oh, an opening. So for 2 years, 12 to 14 of us have been gathering once a month, on occasion a little more. Half of the people are First Nations and half are non-Indigenous, intentionally trying to set up that balance of equality and a model of reconciliation. All of the women who attend regularly are residential school survivors. So again, we moved into circle and we listened and we waited and we learned about protocol and we listened and we waited. But that rhythm of listening, of sensing a call and then waiting for the right timing. There have been times of sheer loneliness for me, feeling like we're out here doing this work and we're on our own. And that sense of sheer loneliness, I know, is a minuscule amount of loneliness in comparison to what residential school survivors have felt when they were at residential school and now. Every way in which we choose find to build relationship ripples out, and just one day in the future, we will be reconciled. And each generation has their work to do, and this is ours to do.
We listen. We wait. We listen. We act. We listen. We wait. We listen. We act. That is the rhythm. That might just be our one next step. The work of the wilderness is what prepares us for the sight on the other side. And there in the distance is the sound of bells ringing, the sound of beads twirling, a fierce dancing, and a unity of spirit that proclaims, even here in the wilderness, God is calling. The work of the wilderness is to hold the suffering, the broken, the captive, the abused, and without trying to impose ourselves and our own agenda and our own action plan and our own platforms and our own trauma, to just walk alongside, trusting that when we stop to listen, to contemplate, to rest, and to dream, that God is still awake. And when from within this wilderness we call out, "Are you there, God?" together we can hear the faint drumming, calling to us from beyond, saying over and over again, "I am, I am, I am." May it be so.